Have you ever noticed how your brain, instead of seeking comfort, sometimes runs straight toward the very thing that hurts you? This isn't a lack of willpower. It is something much deeper, a biological mechanism that traps you without you even realizing it. Picture this. Rats in a lab learn to press a lever for cocaine. They press it over and over again. But when the drug is removed, they stop. Until a painful electric shock is delivered to their paws. Extreme stress. And what does the rat do? It runs straight back to the empty lever. This isn't a story about rats. It's about you. It's about how stress acts as a powerful biological trigger, where the only escape route your brain can see is to reactivate its strongest coping mechanism, even if that route ultimately leads nowhere. Dr. Anna Lembke, an expert on addiction, breaks this down as the pleasure-pain balance. Our brains are wired for equilibrium. When you tip that scale toward pleasure, with a screen, a substance, or a like, your brain releases a massive wave of dopamine. But to compensate for that avalanche, your brain undergoes downregulation, slashing your natural dopamine production. It goes deaf to life's subtle pleasures, dragging you into an invisible feedback loop. Realizing that your relentless pursuit of immediate relief is a biological cry for help from a dysregulated brain is the first step toward flipping the script, so that pain stops being your trigger to relapse and becomes the catalyst for a brand new path toward genuine autonomy, toward true autonomy. We were forged through a brutal evolutionary process where survival depended on navigating severe scarcity. If our ancestors hadn't been hardwired to reflexively pursue pleasure and avoid physical pain, our lineage would have died out. Pleasure meant survival. Pain meant death. Yet the modern world has changed in a way that our biology simply cannot keep up with. We were dropped into an unprecedented ecosystem of artificial abundance. This friction-free world short-circuits our
Any remaining
neurological
friction
design,
between ourselves and the tasks we need to complete in order
compulsive consumption. Addiction has become the modern plague because we are fighting against stimuli deliberately engineered by tech to hijack our ancient survival circuits. When an ancestor stumbled upon a scarce resource, their brain released a subtle trickle of dopamine into the reward pathway. Modern triggers like social media feeds and dating apps are synthetic stimuli refined to trigger an immediate massive flood of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens. This chemical avalanche tricks your deepest circuits into treating that artificial behavior as a matter of life or death. This dynamic becomes even more dystopian with the drugification of human connection via artificial intelligence. Real-world relationships require friction, effort, and time. AI companions eliminate this friction entirely. The algorithms are refined to unconditionally validate your worldview and flatter your ego, creating a perfectly closed loop where you have absolute control over your own emotional state. The direct byproduct of this friction-free comfort loop is a dependency, where people naturally begin to pull away from the difficult interactions of the physical world. Why face the high stakes of a complex conversation when you can get tailor-made validation from a chatbot?
To understand how this transforms into chronic suffering, we have to look at homeostasis, the baseline level the organism must maintain to survive. When you consume a high-reward digital behavior, the scale tips violently toward pleasure. The brain's response is immediate and ruthless. It downregulates its own dopamine transmission to force the balance back to center. Because of a mechanism known as the opponent process, the scale keeps swinging an equal and opposite amount to the pain side. This is the sudden anxiety that hits when the stimulus wears off. Temporarily starved of the chemical conditions required to feel joy from modest things, you face profound discomfort. If you choose to immediately reach for another dose to force the scale back to level, you trigger tolerance, requiring larger hits just to feel normal. Over time, repeating this cycle fundamentally rewires your neural networks, locking you into a persistent dopamine deficit state. Simple activities, like a walk outside or an honest conversation, become completely incapable of tipping the scale.
You become trapped in a behavioral cage, driven entirely by the urgency to escape chronic pain, rather than the liking of the experience itself. You experience an avalanche of craving for something you know no longer makes you happy, but your biology drives you to consume just to numb the agony of the crash. This vulnerability intensifies drastically when you add environmental stressors and life trauma to the mix. Psychological pain and isolation act exactly like the electric shock to the rat's paws. If your brain has encoded a frictionless tool capable of erasing that pain in seconds, your reflex under pressure will be to run straight back to it. This dynamic manifests uniquely in neurodevelopmental conditions like ADHD. Advanced brain imaging shows that individuals with ADHD often operate at a baseline reward deficit, possessing a lower density of dopamine receptors. When that mind encounters a fast, frictionless reward on a screen, the circuit locks onto that connection with overwhelming intensity.
The long-term cost of living captive to this chemical dysregulation is the systematic destruction of your cognitive agency. The capacity to govern your own life lives entirely within the prefrontal cortex, which acts as the biological brake for our primitive impulses. But when the reward system is continuously bombarded by artificial dopamine spikes, the prefrontal cortex loses its grip. Your focus narrows pathologically, and you lose the ability to tolerate the cognitive friction required to do deep work, maintain daily discipline, and invest in your long-term desires. To permanently break this loop of biological imprisonment, neuroscience points to a 4-week dopamine fast. When you completely cut off the high-reward behavior, the scale's initial reaction is to crash deeply into the pain side. This acute withdrawal phase typically lasts between 10 and 14 days, rebelling with spikes of anxiety and near intolerable cravings. The fatal mistake most people make is throwing in the towel right during this initial storm. However, the successful completion of this reset allows you to reclaim your hedonic set point, restoring your mind's ability to extract joy from modest, healthy stimuli like clean food, a workout, or a deep conversation. To guard this newly restored mental framework, it becomes essential to adopt the protocol of starting your day by intentionally leaning into friction. By waking up and immediately tackling the hard things that demand effort, like working out or planning your day, you force your brain to pay for its focus up front. The resulting neuroadaptation causes your body to release dopamine gradually, setting up the rest of your day with absolute clarity and resilience. Exposing your brain to cheap, effortless pleasure within the first minutes of waking up dooms your mind to operate on the autopilot of exhaustion. If you felt this strange connection between what your brain chases and what actually fulfills you, leave a like and share this video. Let's keep investigating how to hack the brain to live with high agency instead of staying stuck on autopilot.